We really have only one life to go through, and if we don't experiment with this life and what else we could do and who else we could be in this life, then yeah, I think it's a bit sad if we don't do that.
Yeah. And you are courageous, Shivya. You might accept it one day because all the things that you have done and you continue to do, um, it takes courage. It takes courage to be your own self in this world that constantly wants you to be someone else, right?
Many years later, maybe like 4 5 years later, I traveled back to Spiti, just having these local conversations. You were like, "Oh, you're Shivya. You're the one who ruined the life of the postman of this village, which I should probably not name anymore. But you're
Right.
the one who ruined his life." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Traveling and being somewhere and connecting with people in their homes, in their landscapes. I think it's really a reminder of our shared humanity that is so powerful. It chips away all the layers. Like, your language might be different, your culture, your food, your traditions, your religion, your political beliefs, all of it.
You reminded me of my time at a lovely beach in Ibiza, and we had no idea that this is a nude beach. It was a beautiful beach, but it was a nude beach. So, like the first 2 minutes were the shock of life.
This was a time when the entire world had kind of shut their doors to, taking people in. And so the Maharaja of Jamnagar, who was Jam Sahib, he took these 500 Polish kids under his personal protection, and he hired a Polish teacher to teach them.
Made me to think about how conservation has been so tightly coupled with women at the helm. Like from Chipko Andolan to so many indigenous forests that have been conserved, been led by women across the globe, right? There is this inherent knowledge of nurturing and preservation that comes to women naturally.
When you're on a certain life path, you finished your bachelor's degree, for example, you have a steady job. The next step would then be to maybe do like an MBA or a master's, marry, settle down, have kids, and just get on that journey. And to then suddenly, get out of that ride and say, this is not for me, is hard for parents. And I do see where they come from, because it's a completely different upbringing for them. Like, that stability meant everything. And I think for me, that stability kind of felt like a cage.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of The Ultimate Inquiry. I'm your host, Pracheta Budhwar. Our guest today is someone who has coined her own definition for life, someone who is a trailblazer and unique storyteller, someone who has harnessed the internet for good. Shivya Nath is an impact entrepreneur, award-winning travel writer, best-selling author, and passionate advocate for responsible tourism. Her words have appeared in BBC Travel, National Geographic Travel, Washington Post, and several other leading publications. Shivya is the author of best-selling memoir, The Shooting Star, and she runs an award-winning sustainable travel blog. Shivya, welcome to The Ultimate Inquiry.
Thank you so much, Pracheta. Excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm so delighted we are doing this. So, Shivya, you became a digital nomad before this term was even coined and prevalent, and Instagram wasn't conceived yet. Why did you did what you did? Give us a sense of your journey so far.
Yeah, I think those were the good old days, before Instagram and before social media existed in the form it exists today. And yeah, you're right. Like, words like digital nomad, remote work, they weren't really in the internet dictionary back then, or maybe at least not as used as they are today. And I think for me, it was really a journey of asking a lot of questions about why I was doing the things I was doing in life. So I think until my early 20s, I was on a pretty conventional life path. I grew up in Dehradun, which was back then like a sleepy valley in Uttarakhand. And of course, it's a whole different world today, trying to be a big city, kind of gobbled up a lot of its nature and so on. But that's a different story. But growing up in a bubble. And, life kind of revolved around school and kind of meeting my parents' expectations and so on. As I think many of us who've grown up in smaller towns have been through life. And then I went on to do an undergraduate degree, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. So at that point, my brother kind of suggested that I do a degree in economics because finance is the big thing. And this was back in 2005 when I finished school. So I
Mm.
was like, yeah, why not? So I applied to like a bunch of universities, and I think my only goal was to somehow get really far away from the place that I had grown up in, because I just, craved like this, having some semblance of freedom or greater freedom than I had grown up with. And so I ended up getting like a student loan and a partial scholarship to go to Singapore. And I got the economics program that I had signed up for. I remember the first class that I took in university, which was some aspect of economics. And I think even in that first class, I knew that this is not the subject or the field for me. But I was so afraid to kind of stand up and say that, this is not my path, that I just went through with it for the next 4 years. But I mean, things happened. I happened to graduate in the middle of a financial recession, which back then was very stressful because a lot of companies had ceased their hiring, and I had a big student loan that I also had to pay. But in retrospect, it was a blessing in disguise because I ended up getting a job with the Singapore Tourism Board in their digital marketing team. And this was really early days for digital marketing, like 2009, around that time. So we were like a really tiny team and doing really exciting stuff in the online world. So Facebook
Mm.
was big back then, Twitter was growing, and the digital landscape was, just at its very beginning. And especially to look at the digital landscape as something that professionals could use, something that could be a marketing tool, and so on. It was all very new. And I think what it did for me was introduce me to this world of travel writers, who were these,
Mm.
mythical people who traveled the world, told stories about their experiences, and somehow also managed to pay their bills. And I think something within me was like, this is the life I want. And I had no idea if I could ever achieve that life, or even if it was realistic to dream of that life. But eventually, I ended up quitting my job there 2 years down the line. I moved back to India, and I lived in Delhi for a while because I think in my head I thought that you need to live in a big city to prosper in life. So Delhi seemed like an obvious choice because it was the only city I kind of knew in India. And living in Delhi, many things happened. Like I think first, just living as a woman in Delhi, it
Mm.
kind of made me realize that I really have to develop my gut instinct. I really need to be aware of what I'm doing in the city, because this is a city that comes with a lot of preconceived notions of safety, and many of those are true, of course.
Yeah.
So I think it was like training ground for me of how do I fend for myself, and how do I look out for myself. But also this time in Delhi when I was trying to build my life as a freelancer, working with different nonprofits, also started my blog around that time. So this was a time for me to really question everything, because suddenly I realized that, now because I don't have a steady job, I don't have to work 9 to 5. I don't have to, work on weekdays and travel on weekends. And I could
Mm.
realign my life completely. And as I began to ask these questions, I also began to ask, do I really need to live in one place, have one rented apartment that I constantly need to come back to? And like, why should I even be living in Delhi or in a city or anywhere for that matter? And I think
Mm.
all of this questioning kind of eventually led me to selling most of my belongings, because the big question was, where do I put everything that I have accumulated? So I literally, stripped everything down to 2 bags that I could carry with me, and there was a bunch of things that I was attached to, and then there were these big winter clothes that I didn't just want to get rid of. So I ended up storing them in the boot of a friend's car because it felt like a safe space at the time, rather than going to a relative and saying, can I leave my stuff at your place? Because I didn't even know what I was doing, with my life. So to explain that to someone else who would ask questions was scary at the time. And yeah, and then I just decided that, I am going to live this life where I don't need to have one home to come back to, but I could probably make home in many places around the world. And we'll see what happens. So I think that
Mm.
it was a mix of like outer stimulus, but also inner questioning that kind of led to this journey of being a digital nomad, or, a slow traveler, kind of led to everything.
Yeah. Fascinating, Shivya. As you said, when you read those travel blogs, you thought, oh, what are those mythical people? I'm sure you are also a mythical person for so many young Indians who kind of look up to you and say, oh, is that possible? Yeah, this is possible. A couple of questions on what you mentioned so far. One, Was it easy? I'm sure it's never easy to convince Indian parents to let go of your steady income and do something that nobody else has done. And the whole, like you said, you moved from small town to bigger one to get away, because there are perks of small town, but everybody knows everyone's business. So how did you kind of deal with that? Was it a easy navigation for you, or when you look back, was it a tough one?
Yeah, so I think I was pretty like my early 20s self was pretty brave to make some of those decisions, and I'm very grateful that she did that. I mean, I was aspiring to be a storyteller, and I was already cooking up a lot of stories to tell my family, because that felt like the only way to kind of soften that blow. First of all, like this social perception that, once you've left India and you've kind of moved abroad, now to come back is almost like, why would anyone come back to India? So I
Mm,
think that is
mm,
that social subtle pressure that I think many of us have experienced.
yeah.
And then the other was obviously like when you're on a certain life path, you finished your bachelor's degree, for example, you have a steady job. The next step would then be to maybe do like an MBA or a master's, marry, settle down, have kids,
Yeah.
and, just get on that journey. And to then suddenly, get out of that ride and say, this is not for me,
Mm,
is hard for parents. And I do see where they come from, because it's a completely different upbringing. And I think for them, like that stability meant everything. And I think for
mm,
for me, that stability kind of felt like a cage. So I remember being in Singapore, and I filed my notice. I had like a couple of months of notice to serve, and I think it was only like in the last few weeks that I eventually told my parents that I'm leaving this job. But then so I'd kind of, I'd been applying for like different things in Delhi. I got this like quite a random like part time sort of role where I had to support like this fellowship program. So I kind of,
mm,
put up this big story about how I've got this amazing fellowship in Delhi, and, this is what I'm going to be doing. And when I moved back to India, I was actually staying with some relatives initially, like family members. And they've, of course, like been really supportive of my journey. But even telling them that, I actually don't have anything to do here, like I'm just faking it till I make it, would be then, I couldn't tell them and not tell my parents. Would kind of leave home every day saying that I'm going for my fellowship thing, and actually go to like a cafe coffee day and sit there and, be on my laptop or be meeting people to figure out what do I do next. So yeah, there was a lot of like storytelling involved, and I'd like to think it was harmless storytelling till I figured out what I was actually doing. As a young person, especially when you're in your 20s and you're kind of figuring out where life takes you, it doesn't help to have, like a lot of parental pressure or societal pressure to know the answers, because sometimes you have to experiment with life and then you arrive at answers, and sometimes you might never arrive at answers either. So I think just kind of creating that space for myself was really helpful. It probably wasn't easy, but it felt very adventurous, because
right.
it was kind of like waking up every day and not knowing what this leads to. So it was also exciting in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. And it's really courageous at some level to take responsibility of your life, because many a times people walk the well trodden path because it's safe, because someone else has done it. It's really enduring to see your journey, Shivya. And I have been following your work for around a decade now, and it's amazing to see how you have grown and you've shifted gears, and really, really wonderful. So you have literally designed your life in a way by trial and error, and you are living it. um a nomadic lifestyle, any which ways, is not very prevalent in India. Some other countries, still kind of do not look down upon, but India is definitely, it's not been the case. And you're a woman living that lifestyle. Like, what does it take apart from immense courage and the urge to be free and explore the world? Like, do you have moments uh when it takes more than courage and you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and think, what am I doing? Why am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to correct you there, like, I don't know if I could call myself courageous. A lot of my decision making was actually born out of fear. And I think it was like a different kind of fear, because, I remember this conversation that even before I quit my job and kind of moved my life back to India, I had a conversation with a colleague, and I was telling him that I've been with this organization for 2 years, and I feel like I've put myself on this hamster's wheel where I'm just, clocking in
Mm.
every day, morning to evening. And I do like my work. I love the people that I work with, but I just feel kind of caged up and super burnt out. So maybe I should take a break. And he said something that I think even today I think of, and it just shakes me up from the inside, which is, you've been here for 2 years. I've been here for 20 years. You get used to it. And I think that phrase, you get used to it. It really hit me hard, and I think in that moment I knew that I don't want to live a life where I just get used to it. Like I want to wake up in the morning and feel like there's so many exciting possibilities. I want to chase like new horizons, have new experiences all the time, not be constrained by society's way of working, and really do work that also fulfills me on different levels, maybe has a positive impact on people, on places, and so on as well. And so even today, like when I find myself not knowing what happens next, or is this too bold a move, or is this too adventurous, or
Mm.
is this too much out of my comfort zone? And I think it's that question or that phrase that always comes back. You get used to it. So I think I definitely try to design my life in a way that I don't get used to it. And so it
Mm.
does have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of adventure. And like you said, it's also a lot of kind of rebellion, almost. And I think that rebellion was always within me, even growing up, but a lot of it was suppressed at the time. And I think when I had this independent life in Singapore, some of that rebellion kind of started coming to the surface, and it's just grown more and more. And so, both on a personal level and on a professional level, like many of the choices that I've made have been sort of rebellious. But I mean, it's also a product of like thinking and asking questions and being
Yeah.
open to arriving at answers which might not agree with many other people, but it works for me. So
Yeah.
I think eventually we have to take charge of our lives, and it's like the YOLO thing, you only live once. But we really have only one life to go through, and if we don't experiment with this life, and what else we could do and who else we could be in this life, then yeah, I think it's a bit sad if we don't do that.
Yeah. And you are courageous, Shivya. You might accept it one day because all the things that you have done and you continue to do, um, it takes courage. It takes courage to be your own self in this world that constantly wants you to be someone else, right? And whosoever has done things like I have taken decisions that everybody was like, oh my God, like who does that? There is wisdom in convention. I'm not saying every convention is bad, but challenging and questioning your life choices and then constantly making adjustments is an act of courage, Shivya. So hats off to you, really. Okay. One of the things that I have seen in your journey and really touched by it was from being a travel writer, which you still are. You blog and you share your experiences and adventures. You slowly and steadily started focusing on slow traveling, talking about sustainability in tourism and how over tourism is creating havoc in those some beautiful parts of the world. And that's been really interesting to see. And to me, it feels like that's the natural way. If someone loves nature or loves the earth, they are bound to do something to preserve it. How did it come to you? Was it something that hit you in one of your travels, that something shook you up, or was it more of an introspective uh demeanor?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of the two. And like you said, as you travel, and when you travel with a certain sense of observation, which you tend to do as a writer or a storyteller, I think you do kind of observe how the world is impacted, both by travel but also by other external factors.
Yeah.
You start to question, is traveling really benefiting places just because it's bringing economic benefits? But is it
Mm.
also impacting places socially, environmentally, and what are those impacts like? Who's bearing
Yeah.
the brunt of those impacts, and so on? And I think it's hard not to ask those questions when you travel often and you travel to places which are specifically places which are environmentally fragile, ecologically fragile, and so on. One distinct memory of mine is, back in the day when I was living in Delhi, I would travel mostly on weekends. And I would take like the overnight train or the overnight bus to Uttarakhand or to Himachal Pradesh to look out for experiences and live at homestays and so on. And on one of those bus journeys, maybe somewhere in the Manali area, I can't remember exactly, but I couldn't sleep, so I was just pretty much awake most of the night and just looking out of the window. There were so many stretches of that journey where I could just see the forest burning, and it was like these wildfires that had been spreading. That image is still very vivid in my head of like seeing these, ancient forests and ancient trees just turning into flames. Then I started kind of looking into why this is happening. And of course, there are man made reasons, but there's also environmental reasons of like how the weather patterns are changing, how the larger climate is changing, and so on. And so that was some of my early introduction to climate change. And
Mm.
back then, it just sounded like something that's, very, very big picture. And, how do you relate this to what's happening on the ground? But I think
Yeah.
the more I read about it, the more conversations I had, like there was like an obvious relationship. Then I also started looking at like, what is my role here? So first in like as a person, as a traveler, like what is the impact of my everyday choices, whether that's on the road or, if I'm staying somewhere for a long time, then even at home, like what are those choices? So when you're traveling, the simplest thing to do is to buy, single use plastic bottled water. But that one time use of that bottle, and what is the impact that has? Like every bottle that's ever been consumed is still here on this planet, and
Yeah.
who knows when it will be decomposed? Like maybe 200-300 years later, and so on, like questioning every single choice. And I think the more I did that, the more conversations I had with people, and then also taking that time to introspect about not just my role in a personal capacity, but also in my professional role as a writer or as someone who is telling stories about these places and maybe having an influence on the travel decisions of other people.
Yeah.
What is then my role? What kind of decisions am I influencing? And then what impact are those decisions having? So I think it was a lot of both external, understanding what's happening in the world, and then
Yeah.
relating that to my personal and professional presence on this planet. So it was a lot of it was a product of that.
Hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. Has there been any um, incident or experience where you were staying in a beautiful place and you're enjoying your stay, and people have been kind, uh, but you have also seen hostility towards travelers or tourists, just because the locals have had enough of them, because they could be unruly, they could be not really respecting the place. So have you seen kind of getting love and acceptance from those people, and you've seen other side of them when they see a lot of people coming in?
Yeah, I think the example that comes to mind right now is in Croatia. So I
Mm.
was like traveling. I think I was in Europe for a work assignment, and then just kind of traveling on my own for a while. And I thought, it would be nice to go and experience Croatia. So I was specifically looking for places which are like a little bit off the beaten path, and at that point relying very much on like blogs and forums and so on. And a lot of people had recommended the Istria Peninsula, which is relatively
Right.
less visited. But I ended up going to like a village which is relatively popular within the peninsula, and I arrived there in the evening, and it was like this calm oasis, just locals and these cobblestone streets going up the hill and going down the hill, and little alleyways and beautiful houses, the mountains surrounding it, beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises, and people were really warm and friendly, like the host that I was staying with, as well as people in that neighborhood. And I woke up early morning to go and see the sunrise, which was absolutely magical. And then I came back, and I remember the house that I was staying in. It was like this studio in a local family's house, and they had this large like glass window, so I could also see the street from there. And I was making myself some breakfast, and then suddenly I saw like swarms of people coming in, and a lot of them were peeping in through the door. And I couldn't figure out like what is happening. Is there like a procession, or like why are suddenly so many people appearing here? And then I realized that actually this is a really popular spot on tourism day trips. So people come by the
Mm.
bus loads, and this is one of the stops that they make. And this continues then certain hours of the day throughout the day until the evening or like late afternoon. And I just missed it the previous day. But to suddenly see it happening in this, really calm oasis sort of place was really shocking. Then I started talking to people, and they were like, welcome to our lives, because of course it benefits having tourism. It brings economic benefits for sure. But
Yeah.
also, I think we often forget when we travel to places that these are also places where people live. And
Yeah.
so you wouldn't want someone to come and like, constantly be looking at you through your window as though you're
Yeah.
like an object to be photographed, or your house is something to be photographed without your permission. So I think we kind of lose that sense of boundary or privacy like when we are traveling. And I think that's very much what was happening with this town. And then I also started learning about how there's been a lot of gentrification, also how people are now, because they're so fed up of having, like outsiders constantly coming in, and not coming in a way that you're actually staying with the community and trying to learn more about their
Mm.
lives and really treating it as a cultural exchange, but more like you come in for like 2-3 hours as part of a day trip, peep into the houses, take pictures without permission, and crowd up the space, dirty up the space, and then you leave. Now a lot of people, a lot of locals have started leaving and like settling elsewhere and just putting their flats on rent for holidays. And that also raises the prices of land and rent for people who do want to stay. So it's led to a lot of factors. And obviously when it's a small community, like a small village community, there's way more tourists, so you completely get drowned out. And the
Yeah.
places that are used for recreation, that are used for socializing for locals, are now completely crowded out by tourists as well. So I think that for me was like a pivotal moment in also realizing what kind of stories am I telling on my blog, for example. And at that point, I made a conscious decision that I will no longer, I mean, there was no geotagging at the time because, blogging was a
Right.
different world. But instead of just talking about places and my experiences there, like I think my role is going to shift towards more about inspiring a certain way of travel. So maybe talking about local connections, local relationships, how our travels can support communities, and so on. But when I recommend specific places, like it should be tied to some way of traveling that can actually benefit the community, or that can
Right.
support conservation of a place, that can support environmental protection. And if that's not the case, then I don't have to mention a name. Then I can just
Yeah.
mention a country broadly or a region broadly and just talk about what my experience there has been. So I think that kind of led to a shift in the way I tell stories, and hopefully the way they are received as well.
Yeah. Fascinating. And two things that you spoke really touched me. This, small little towns, beautiful countryside places that have been, I don't know, tagged on Instagram or whatever has happened. I have seen places where locals have put signs on their lawns saying, do not step on the grass, do not take picture. It's our house as well. Like at some places in Europe, I've seen people putting out signs, which really gives the vibe that, they're not welcoming hordes of people there. It's their life. So, uh, yeah, totally understandable from their perspective. And second thing you mentioned about geotagging, um, were you also guilty of kind of doing it at one time? Like when the Instagram came in, you kind of tagged your pictures, and then as a result of that, did you see it coming with a whole 360 degrees? Someone went there and people came back, and then you realize, oh my God, I might have opened the world for to this little oasis. Did that happen to you anytime?
Yeah, it did happen, but I think it happened before Instagram, and I learned my lesson
Okay.
before Instagram even came about. So I think this was way back in the day when I'd actually taken, even before I quit my job, I'd taken like a 2 month sabbatical from work, just to see what it would be like to like travel long term. And I spent one of those months traveling in Spiti in Himachal Pradesh, which is like this cold mountain desert and incredibly beautiful place. And there's a tiny village in Spiti which is known to have the world's highest post office. And it was
Mm.
so fascinating to think that, you could actually travel to the world's highest post office and post something from there. And that's one of the things that I wrote about on my blog. And it kind of stayed there for a while. And then I think many years later, maybe like 4-5 years later, I traveled back to Spiti. And I was speaking to, like just having these local conversations. And then someone asked, what do you do? So I kind of explained. And then you were like, oh, you're Shivya. You're the one who ruined the life of the postman of, this village, which I should probably not name anymore. But you're
Right.
the one who ruined his life. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even know who that is. I have no idea what you're saying. And then I learned that like after that blog post, many people had gone there, and then it's a cycle, right? Like maybe
Mm.
I write about it, and there are like 10 people who read it, and then out of that, 5 people go there, and 3 people also write about it, and then it kind of triggers a cycle. And I think maybe that's what happened. This tiny village and this really tiny post office became really popular. That was like a hard hitting moment to think that something that I wrote in a very innocent way, not thinking of any kind of impact, could actually
Yeah.
have an impact on someone's life. And I think this happens both for better and for worse. Sometimes writing about experiences that can really benefit. For example, like a community-led initiative, women-led, enterprises, and so on. It can really benefit them when written about in the right way and drawing the right kind of travelers. But on the flip side, for example, if we are geotagging fragile places or places which have very tiny capacity to host travelers, it can also, completely ruin everything. And so I think in the life of that postman, I definitely learned my lesson.
Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Like everything that you do, it could have consequences either ways. It's just a matter of being more conscious and doing it mindfully. Eventually, that kind of makes all the difference. So a lot of people are becoming conscious. At least I would like to see the world more optimistically. Who are traveling and asking the question, how can I be a more conscious traveler? One of the things that typically starts with, as you mentioned, is carry your own water bottle, do not throw litter, use less plastic. Like that's the bare minimum. But I'm sure there is more that a conscious traveler could do when they're making those choices. So would you like to share a few tips?
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of conscious travel, it really begins even before we plan to go somewhere. And I think a lot of traveling now is happening for social validation, maybe because our friends have been there or a lot of people on Instagram have been there. And so it's created like this FOMO factor in us, like fear of missing out. So then we decide to go there as well. I think we really need to take a little bit of a step back and ask what kind of place really draws us. Where do we really have curiosity to go to build a connection with the place, with the people? And are we going there just because everyone else is going there, or does it hold some kind of value for us? So I think even asking that is like a really big step towards conscious travel, because that can then decide what you seek to experience and how that experience actually transforms you as a person, but maybe also leaves a positive impact on the place itself. So that's a great starting point. Um, of course, in any travel conversation, aviation is like the elephant because,
Yeah.
flying has a big footprint. So is there a way for you to get from A to B without flying? So that could mean traveling closer home. It could mean like doing long land journeys. So I did this journey, I remember, from Thailand via all of Myanmar to India. And it was such a great adventure. Like it started out of flying guilt. But I actually ended up going to parts of Myanmar that I probably would never have considered visiting, and also met
Right.
people and like had great experiences. And it was all through public transport, so it gave me a lot of time to actually see how the country is changing, how the culture is changing, and so on. So land journeys can be extremely adventurous and really fun, and also a great way to immerse in a place rather than just hopping on a flight and going from point A to point B. Then I think when we arrive in a destination, like it's also worth thinking about what kind of places we are staying in. Because let's say if you're staying in a large chain hotel, I mean, sometimes it's hard to avoid it, but if there is a choice, like I could be staying in a fancy hotel, whether that's in Delhi or in Guatemala or in Uzbekistan, and the experience would be the same. But if I
Yeah.
can instead stay in a local family run homestay or guest house or even a boutique hotel, depending on the kind of traveler that I am and depending on the kind of comfort I seek, there are like different levels to it. And if I can stay in something that's a bit more independent, that immediately changes the way that you connect with the place and the way you experience a place and its people. Also, when we are in a place, you mentioned slow travel, and I think there is this misconception that slow travel is about having a lot of time in a place. And of course, it's
Mm.
helpful to have a lot of time in a place. But even if you have just 3 days or one week in a place, you can still have a slow travel mindset. So the whole
Oh,
idea
yeah.
is that you don't have to travel with like a checklist of things that other people have created on the internet and said that these are the must do things. But really think about, what are experiences that you are really keen to have. And this could be related to your passion, it could be related to your profession, just your personal curiosity. But maybe just having like one or two things that you absolutely want to do and really being present with them rather than
Mm.
rushing from, I need to finish this so I can experience the next thing because I still have like a bunch of things to check off. Who cares,
Yeah.
right? Like eventually it's for your personal, transformation in a way that you travel. And when you get rid of that checklist, you also create a lot more time and flexibility to actually have conversations with the people who live in these places. And sometimes it's these serendipitous, raw, authentic experiences that really stay with you over time. And you might then get recommendations of things that you can do based on your passion that you might not have seen online. So again, keeping it a little bit fluid can have a big impact. I think also just simple things like choosing to use public transport, cycling, walking, all these low impact forms of getting around. Very simple choices that can have a good impact on places. And then actively seeking out, initiatives that support the local community, that might be run by women, that contribute to conservation in some way, that also teach you about conservation, things that lead to a cultural exchange. I mean, something as simple as doing like a cooking class can teach you so much about a culture and also lead to cultural exchange with your own, what you know about your culinary traditions. So I think eventually it's thinking about all the choices that you make. I mean, I'm a big proponent of this kind of travel because I just think it's a much better way to travel rather than
Yeah.
go somewhere, go to all the sites, take all the pictures and then come back. But actually, that's not going to impact you or, change your perspectives in any way. And then you may as well have stayed at home and just seen those pictures on Instagram, right?
Yeah, totally. And you could see I've been just nodding away like a crazy person because that's exactly how I travel. For the longest time, the conversations that you have had at those places and someone nudged you to do something different that you have never thought about doing in your life, and that turned out to be the aha moment of the whole trip. Cannot agree more on this. And coming to the the checklist or and that's a catch, isn't it? Like with now with AI coming in, um it's ruining a lot of things. Like there was a time when planning for to go to a place used to be such an a wonderful, like it's still a wonderful thing for me, but um for many people it just come down to like, let's just watch two YouTube video of someone who has been some place and then ask ChatGPT what must be done in 3 days there or 10 days there. Everyone is going to get the same template, are going to go to the same places, and it's really not funny anymore. How do you see the impact of AI um on travel writing and storytelling? Because you would tell a story, Shivya, from your deep experience living in a place, talking to locals, and that's really has come from that deep experience, right? It's you, it's your raw, authentic experience. But once it is out on the internet, it's for any LLM to crawl. And tomorrow, if someone wants to write something like that, they can very easily get you and I don't know, 100 others brilliant writers and can write a AI slop. What do you feel about it? Like, how do you think it's gonna change the course of authentic storytelling in times to come?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It frustrates me to no end to see all the AI slop we see in our lives right now. Everything from social media posts to comments on social media posts to emails, WhatsApp messages. I just think about like the kind of generation we are becoming. If we can't even write our own emails and our own messages, how it's dumbing us down. Like if we're not
It
even
is.
able to think to that extent and, just write
Yeah.
like basic things, and we don't need like, like perfect English. We don't need M dashes. We don't need like commas everywhere. We just need like a little bit more rawness in our lives. It really does bother me, where we are going to be led with all of this AI and the way we are using it in our lives. And not to mention the huge environmental footprint that
Yeah.
using AI and tools like ChatGPT, Claude, etc. has. But having said that, I think, like you said, AI can, regurgitate everything that's online, but it can never replicate lived experience. Like, it could tell you that XYZ place has the most beautiful sunset, but it can never replicate the feeling of actually sitting there and feeling the breeze in your hair and actually seeing like the light change with the sunset and, like all the emotions that it brings up in you.
Yeah.
I do have faith that it would never be able to replicate that human experience, at least not in the near future, maybe. Maybe over time that would change. But yeah, you're also right. Like I think there was a few months I felt like why should I write anything on my blog or newsletter or social media
Yeah.
anymore? Because it's just going to be crawled by these AI models and just like spit out without any credit or without any reference and so on. But I guess when you choose to write online, I mean, this has happened in the past as well, right? Like the moment you write anything online or you have like a photo or a visual, people will like they have the ability to kind of steal it and like use it in their own ways. And obviously that theft is now gone to like a whole other level with AI.
Yes.
But eventually, what do you do? I mean, I feel like as a writer and as a creative person, I don't have a choice but to write. Like I have these experiences, these stories that I have to tell, and I have to write them. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm at a point where I'm just trying to be okay with the fact that, I will write it, and then maybe it will be available on ChatGPT at some point. Many a times I'm writing about like these social initiatives or community led organizations which barely have a presence online. So at least, even if AI is stealing that, at least it's going to benefit that organization if people do go and travel there. So maybe it does have, kind of this effect where it can have a positive benefit, but all the more reason to write about things that actually matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just touched on a very important aspect of the environmental effect of these massive data centers that are running AI models. It's like fueling the beast. And I come from a technology background. I understand what it takes. Maybe it's a conversation for another time to go into detail. Like where do you draw the line? But it seems like nobody's drawing the line, and it's just, do we really need it for everything? So one way, of course, could be to not use AI to write a email or a response or every other thing. That way you can help. It's a new thing in the market, and anybody or everybody's kind of jumping on it. So there is a huge question about responsibility, which is beyond individual. Of course, every individual has a role to play, but there's a huge responsibility that also lies on governments and the corporations who are kind of building it, and they're very easily shrugging it off, or kind of bypassing it. How do you see it? Like, do you think that there is hope, looking at the current state, for them to consider the environmental degradation, or do you not? Where are you at on this?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that I'm not an expert on AI, but like with everything else, I think we tend to put a lot of responsibility on individuals. I mean, even when it comes to making sustainable travel choices, for example, a lot of businesses make the excuse that travelers don't care, so why should we do it? But eventually, you can't put this on travelers or on individuals to make this choice. Of course, like it does help if more of us make this choice, and if we do it in a collective way, it does have an impact. But it has to be the responsibility of governments and corporations to make sure that we don't become like a completely dumb generation. But I think it serves them, right? Because then
Yeah.
if people are no longer thinking, they're no longer feeling the way they used to do, they're no longer processing like emotions the way they used to do. I think you can completely control like a generation of people like that. And I think eventually, like a lot of people are seeking that control. It's up to all of us to kind of resist it to the extent we can, and hope that there will be leaders who recognize, the long term impacts of this. I mean, I think about like my nieces and my nephews and all the like the young people, like they're the iPad and the iPhone generations. Like AI is just like such an integral part of their life, like even school students, college students, and so on. And so, what is that doing to our ability to think critically and to analyze things and even question like how we go through life? And if we don't have that innate ability to do that, what kind of a generation are we going to be? So it is really scary, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. I think to be more human is going to be the most important thing and skill and aspect in times to come. And that is going to be by being away from screens and do things with your hands and meet people, because lot of mindless scrolling or doom scrolling, as it's called, has there are consequences of people being less social and more anxious, and do not go out and kind of be in community, because it just allows you to live in your own bubble and not really take the bother to be in a situation or a conversation which would be slightly inconvenient or uncomfortable. So yeah, we are at a very interesting juncture. But coming back to the environmental responsibility, some governments are running more diligently than others. But on the other hand, we're also seeing like huge industries that are really polluting the environment, or just mindless cutting of trees kind of continues. Some fires in the forest, all of them are not natural. Some of them are man. We know all those things, right? Human greed knows no bounds. Um, Do you think that whether it is the Paris Agreement or all the United Nations Environment Program parameters that have been set out for governments, like do you see any particular country or city who has been doing it really well and could be like a role model in your travels? Have you seen any specific places that nailed it from a corporate and government responsibility point of view?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make some really great points there of like what is the responsibility of like governments and world leaders, especially now when we're at a critical junction with climate change and also with other environmental factors. Like we're in the middle of a big like mass extinction again. Biodiversity is at a very
Yeah.
crucial juncture. We violated so many planetary boundaries and so forth. And I think there's this meme going around on Instagram. I don't know if you've seen it, but it talks about we have no money for climate change, we have no money for biodiversity solutions, we have no money to like increase our like natural forest cover, we have no money for healthcare, blah blah blah, but we have money to fund more wars. And I think
Oh yeah.
that's
Just
um,
bomb away
that's
people. Yeah.
yeah. Sadly, the reality of the times we're living in, right? Because the kind of money that's being spent, and I mean, this specific war also, of course, like every war, it's such a humanitarian tragedy, right? But this specific one feels even closer to me. Like my phone, there's this memories feature, and it was just reminding me that around this time, about 6, 7 years ago, I was traveling in Iran, and I think it's one of those countries that has left a very deep impression on me, just in terms of how incredible like the architecture is, the cities are, but also how resilient and poetic the people are despite everything that they've been through. I met some of the most hospitable, kind, friendly, warm people when I was traveling there, and it brought back so many memories. And to think that there's I mean, who knows what's in the future of Iran right now as we speak. So yeah, I mean, this it really hit close home in terms of which are some cities or countries that are doing this well. I think the first place that always comes to mind is Bhutan. Everyone knows the story, but it's so underrated, like what they've been able to achieve. So I think
Yeah.
constitutionally it says that they always need to have more than 70% of tree cover within the country. The number is actually higher right now than what the constitution demands. Also, the fact that tourism is structured in such a way that it will never turn into mass tourism or over tourism, because you have to pay like a sustainable development fee. And so tourism actually benefits the whole country, even if not everyone is involved in it, because a certain
Mm.
part of that tourism income is then dedicated towards sustainable development, which is in
Yeah.
terms of education, healthcare, and so on. Also, the like environmental conservation and so on. And the fact that they measure their progress not by GDP but by the happiness index,
Happiness
which
index. Yeah.
yeah, which is not just about happiness in general, but actually it has like a whole bunch of parameters under it.
Mm.
Your education, your healthcare, but also your mental well-being, your physical well-being, your place in your community, how you associate with your community. And I think those are the things that actually lead to happiness, right? Like I
Mm.
heard the podcast that you did with Raj, and it was such a great conversation because really digging into these layers of happiness and how a lot of them can't be measured, but there are
Yeah.
ways to kind of get an indication of where people are on these parameters. And eventually it's not just your economic well-being that matters, it's all of these other factors as well. And for a country to actually build that into their like success metrics is incredible. And I think if we could bring the same kind of approach to also measuring, for example, in the tourism sector, a lot of the focus is on growth, right? So it's
Yeah.
you want more visitor numbers, you want more visitor revenue, but you never think about what we call like the invisible burden of tourism, which is,
Right.
for example, the impact on natural resources, on the waste, on water, on community well-being, on recreation spaces for locals, and so on. And we think of these places as destinations, even the fact that we call them destinations and forget that they are first places to live, and then places to visit. Um, so I think we really need to reframe what success even is, right? Like, is it just about money and about economics, both in the environmental space and the travel space? Or is it like a lot more than that? And I think we all agree, we all know intrinsically that it's not just about money and not just about the economics. So yeah, Bhutan is a great role model. And yeah, I wish more countries could adopt approaches like that, where your well-being is linked to not just how prosperous you are economically, but also socially, environmentally, as a
Yeah.
community, and so on.
Yeah. And you touched on a very important thing about metrics, because metric drives behavior. And of course, there will be people who will um, argue that, oh, Bhutan is such a small country and they are like, therefore they can do it. Um, I believe that's just a naysayer's approach, because you can always start small and kind of build it out in a bigger country as well. Like, if you really want to do that, India definitely has a long way to go. And maybe again, if we start talking about like what needs to be done and what's happening on ground, it will be a totally different conversation. But if I may ask you one thing, every day I open Twitter, or read something, there's some devastation or the other happening. Like Nicobar, the whole ecosystem has been raised out in the name of development. And let's not even go to the deep forest, that all that the mining thing is happening. Um, there is no development without people. Like, who are you developing it for? So I don't think like the discourse in India is even that mature. Just mindless construction is being equated to development. At least that's been kind of pushed out by government for a while now. And it really takes us towards devastation, is how I see it. um have you seen any hopeful stories in India that makes you pause and think, oh, there is hope, maybe in some pockets? I think I have read something in Tamil Nadu that really gave me hope. They have like a dark sky park that has come up, which is really a feat. But there are not many environmental stories, and it just looks like downhill uh, now.
Yeah, I think it can feel really hopeless, I think, to see the news or even social media on most days, and so much devastation. I mean, I look at my own hometown, Dehradun, and the hill station of Masuri, which used to be like this a very calm, getaway back then, like right in the mountains, a lot of snow in winter and so on. And it's a whole other world now, almost unrecognizable. It's almost like the two places have expanded and kind of merged into each other, and just construction all along and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about like the hopelessness for like a very
Yes,
long
but
time.
we
But
need to talk about hope. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's important to also think about like the good things that are happening and the solutions that
Yeah.
exist and so on. And I think having had the opportunity to travel to many places in the world, I think India is doing some great work in terms of like sustainable travel or regenerative travel, community led tourism, and so on. And I think it is smaller pockets, but the kind of models that we are developing in different parts of the country, it's a huge source of inspiration for me, and these are the kind of stories I tend to share with like when I'm invited for talks and stuff like that, because they don't get enough spotlight. So for example, I think one place that's made a deep impression on me um, is a place in Munsiari. So it's an organization called Himalayan Arc, and it's like a community tourism initiative, but it's also much bigger than that. So really about thinking about how do you bring together community well-being, conservation of forests which are very much in trouble, and tourism as well, and kind of and also like the how social life is structured there, where women don't have ownership of land.
Yeah.
They're kind of they kind of go from the father's house to the husband's house to the son's house. So that like lack of sense of ownership and agency, and how do you also address that in this spectrum? Because eventually I think we tend to kind of silos the environment from the people, like you said, and eventually the two have to work together in order to sustain each other. Like that's how humans have always
Yeah.
lived. It's amazing the kind of work that they're doing in Munsiari, where um, it's women led homestays, and through that women have a sense of agency. They host people from not just around India but around the world, and
Right.
they are the ones who are making a lot of the decisions in the community now. For example, tourism is also structured such that a part of their tourism income goes into the conservation of the forest commons. They work very actively on domestic violence issues, both within their communities but also the surrounding villages, and they are the ones who are driving a lot of this. I think I landed up there at a very interesting time when they hold this festival in the summer, And
Hmm.
this is a festival where people learn how to do yoga, use tools like Wikipedia or YouTube. Um, they run high altitude marathons, they go bird watching and so on. And this is a festival that's not geared towards tourism. Like, that's the best part. So it's a festival that's organized by the rural community for the rural community. And of course, travelers are welcome to join. And so when I was there, we had this idea of starting, an Instagram channel where they could actually document a lot of this work that they're doing within the community, but do it in a way that it's their own voices, their own stories, their own photos, their own videos. And so we started Voices of Munsiari, which was India's first Instagram channel to be run entirely by a rural mountain village community. And initially it was the younger people, but now it's mostly the women who drive the channel. And then that's led to, like bigger storytelling initiatives like Voices of Rural India. There's a fellowship that they do now and so on. There's so much richness in like the rural life, in the heritage, in the culture and so on. So you keep the good aspects of that, but then you also bring in the good aspects of the urban world and
Yeah.
try to merge the two together, which is probably the most ideal way that we can live. And then also be able to recognize the value of your own natural resources and conserve them and so on. And also play a role in like, just the social development in the area, tackling issues like gender based violence and so on. Over the years, I've spent several months there and lived with the community. And I think the women there give me so much hope and so much inspiration. I think we can scale something like that, across the country and across the world.
Yeah.
And I really hope that we arrive to a point where um, we can do that.
That's such a heartwarming story you told. Like, I think it's more like a journey for those people, isn't it? And these stories gives us hope. And you're right, spotlighting such initiatives or um, experiences is equally important. One of the things that you mentioned um, made me to think about how conservation has been so tightly coupled with women at the helm. Like from Chipko Andolan to so many indigenous forests that have been conserved, been led by women across the globe, right? So there is this inherent knowledge of nurturing and preservation that comes to women naturally. I'm not saying men don't advocate for conservation and sustainability, but it comes naturally to women, and many of these community led initiatives have been led by women at the forefront. Do you see a connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just an environmental connection, it's also a social connection. So I think there has been a lot of research that has documented that, when women get a sustainable source of livelihood, it doesn't just benefit them, but the entire family. It makes sure that not just the boys in the family are educated, but also the girls. And it really sees like the entire community being uplifted. And I think similarly in the environmental space as well, a lot of conservation tends to be led or spearheaded by women. And so I think it's interesting, right? Like in a lot of climate conversations, the conversations are still led by men. There are always these famous photos of like like the COP management and so on. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like it's almost like women should be at the forefront of all of this, but still I think that around the world, it's obviously like a whole spectrum, but we're still fighting for like rights in so many ways and representation in so many ways. And it's a whole, like you start from the very basic and we see that in the world, and then you see even at the very top, like there is still a lot to be fought for. So yeah, but of course, also to acknowledge that we have come a long way. I mean, even the fact that we are sitting here and having these conversations as independent professional women is something that, maybe some decades ago couldn't be imagined. So, yeah, I think there is
Yeah.
also a lot that we're standing on the shoulders of women who
Yeah.
came before us and fought for this.
Totally. Yeah. So all the feminist movements and the work by earlier generations, we are reaping the benefit, and we absolutely have to pass it on to the next generation. It's sometimes just gets to one that you're two step forward and one step back, because we're still fighting for representation and the seat at the table. But clearly, that's the way forward. The future is female. That's my belief. Anyways, let's shift gear and talk about your adventures. Right? When you look at your adventures, I'm sure there've been so many of them that are memorable, and you can draw from that. I don't want to go into the most beautiful or the most traumatic. I rather want to go into most liberating experience?
Yeah, I think it's maybe hard to pinpoint to one, but I could share the story of like a very moving experience that changed me in ways that I still am processing after all these years. Which is that many years ago, I think close to maybe 2012, 2013. I don't exactly. I think I have pre-COVID memory and post-COVID memory, so definitely way pre-COVID. Actually won this contest to travel to Australia on a trip to the Kangaroo Island, which is an incredibly biodiverse and lots of endemic species and stuff. And since I was traveling all the way, I was traveling with my partner. We figured that we'll spend some time in Australia since we're all the way there anyway. So we ended up going to the McLaren Peninsula. It has a lot of these beautiful vineyards and beaches, penguins, and so on. So it felt like a place that you could, slow down for a while and really experience nature. And when we were doing our research, there were like these really beautiful B&Bs that you could stay in, and most of them were family run. And it was actually hard to choose because they all looked so nice and they were like surrounded by vineyards and so on. And there was one B&B that caught our attention, which was called Linger Longer. Besides the name being so nice, like it had, like amongst other things on their website, they wrote, we welcome travelers from all nationalities and all faiths. And that's such an obvious thing to say, but it's still so rarely said out loud
Right.
that, like it just felt like this is the right place. So we booked it and we stayed there. So this couple was our host, and we spent the first few days like we had planned. We cycled around the vineyards, went wine tasting, went to these beautiful like cliffside beaches with penguins and incredible water and so on. And then one evening, the host, Carol was the guy, and Rosemary, his wife, they invited us for like a glass of wine, and they had their own vineyard, so it was the wine from their vineyard. So initially we started with like some small talk. So they were asking about like our experiences in Australia, and then they mentioned that they had traveled to India just the previous year, but instead of going to the regular places like the Taj Mahal or Golden Triangle or even Kerala, they were saying names like Jamnagar and like these places in Gujarat, which I mean, I wouldn't imagine that any traveler for the first time from Australia would go to like a Jamnagar, for instance. And
Mm.
then Carol said something really strange, which was, "Hum hai Hindustani, Jamnagar ke Maharaja, hamare bapu." And like my partner and I were looking at each other and we were like, what the hell did he just say? Like, did someone teach him something really random or what is this? And then he went on to tell us the most incredible thing that I'm ever going to hear. So he said that back during World War II in I think around 1940. He was 6 years old and he grew up in Poland. So he was this Polish kid, and because of the war, a lot of the kids and their families were sent to concentration camps. So he was sent to like a gulag in Siberia in the Russian Arctic, and somehow his family and he managed to escape the camp, but he got separated from his family in the process. So he didn't know what to do, and going back to Poland wasn't an option. So he just got onto like trains and buses, just going wherever, and like not really sure what to do. And then along the way, he got reunited with like some other kids. And somehow these kids, they travel sometimes alone, sometimes with each other, sometimes with adults. So they traveled through the length and breadth of like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, and somehow they landed up in Gujarat in Jamnagar. And
Wow.
this was a time when the entire world had kind of shut their doors to, taking people in. And so the Maharaja of Jamnagar, who was Jam Sahib, he was known as, and Jamnagar was then known as Nawanagar. So he took these 500 Polish kids under his personal protection, and he hired a Polish teacher to teach them. And Karen remembered this line that he said that's also famous, like when I was like reading about it later, which is that I'm the father of all the people of Navanagar, and so I'm also your father. Don't consider yourself
Mhm.
orphans. I'm paraphrasing. He
Right.
said something like that. And so for 4 years, these 500 Polish kids stayed under the personal protection of the Maharaja in Jamnagar. And finally, when the
Wow.
war ended, they boarded a train back to England. And he remembers that the one of the nights that they were on the train, they heard that Gandhi has been assassinated, and everything playing out in the world at the time. For two Indians like us to land up in this B&B in the Floro Peninsula in Australia randomly, and have this serendipitous encounter with someone who'd been living in India in this situation. It was absolutely mind blowing, and I think it just made me realize that like the universe has so much power, right? Like to lead us to places and experiences and people that we are meant to experience. And I
Yeah.
think in some ways that was in a whole other level, it was liberating, because sometimes we think that we are choosing things and we are controlling things,
Mm.
but actually sometimes life chooses it for us. So that was my very precious experience.
It is. It almost gave me goosebumps, like 500 Polish kid landing up in Jamnagar. And it also struck me that kindness pays forward. Like, because Carol had got that kind of kindness from strangers, even years later, he is or his wife are kind of paying it on by just writing that on their website. We welcome people from all nationality and all faith, and that might have had a very deep impression on him as a child. So every act of kindness and touch of love never goes waste. Such a powerful, wonderful story. Wow. So traveling as a woman, right? And I'm sure you have done solo travel. uh how have you changed and matured and progressed in terms of being in your own body? Like, because when we grow up, we have apprehensions about how we look, how we dress, and uh, our own place in the world and how we conduct ourselves. Has travel and seeing the world and meeting different people have given you a certain kind of confidence in your own being and how you present yourself and experience your life?
Yeah, I think it definitely has had a big impact. I wouldn't say I'm there yet where I hope to be, but it has definitely made me realize how much of our body image and our perception of ourselves is shaped by the way we've grown up, the things that we've heard just in passing. And I think
Mm.
even as we are kids, we are becoming teenagers and so on. We then very quickly develop these notions of what is good and what's not so good, or what's beautiful and not so beautiful. I think that those perceptions kind of follow us through life. And I think that's very much true, even traveling. There have been a few experiences where I've really found myself in a place where I need to shed some of these perceptions. So, for
Mm.
example, I think like the first time I went to a hammam in Turkey, where you basically shed all your clothes, and maybe you can keep like one or two layers on. And I think that was like a big thing for me, because even in a spa in India, it's okay to like keep some stuff on if you're not comfortable and so on. And then I think it went to a whole other level in Japan, because Japan has these onsens, which are basically like hot springs, like mineral hot springs, and they're in beautiful locations, like in the forest, in the caves, by the sea, and so on. And these tend to be completely nude baths. First, being in like a gender segregated onsen was big enough, but then being in a mixed gender onsen um,
Mm.
is is next level of shedding like a lot of that social conditioning and accepting your body for what it is and so on. And so in many ways, I think traveling has kind of for lack of a better word, empowered me to be more
Yeah.
accepting of like who I am, but also to shed these notions of what beauty means. And I
Mm.
think like right now, when I'm in my late 30s, a couple of years away from 40, I mean, I have been grappling with, for example, things like, do I color my hair? Because like now there are like gray strands everywhere. And yeah, I love that. Now that, I am going through that, like every time I meet a woman who's maybe in her late 30s, 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
I can obviously tell whether she's been, like reaching out for that hair color or not. And I have like great admiration and appreciation for women who choose not to color, because it's hard, but it's a
Yeah.
bold step, and it shows like you have some sort of self acceptance. And because I'm there and I'm grappling with it, I wouldn't say I'm completely there, like I'm fighting it. Um, but yeah, I think it completely changes your perception of, like the way you perceive others as well. Which which I think, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to do with travel, but like life itself. But as you go on your own journey, you kind of start seeing people in a different light as well. So I think there has been like influences of travel, but also kind of self introspection in a way.
You reminded me of my time at a lovely beach in Ibiza, and we had no idea that this is a nude beach. Me and my husband, we were there on an anniversary, and it was a beautiful beach, but it was a nude beach. So, like the first 2 minutes were like the shock of life because, of course, everybody's like going in the water, coming out, and never seen so many people in their natural bathing suit. But after 2 minutes, it was the most natural thing, and it just made me think for a very long time that in absence of titillation, in absence of making it all sensual, this is very very natural. So Shivya, you have traveled so much. I'm sure, like most must have been more than 50 countries and almost every continent apart from Antarctica. If you have to pick three countries or places where you would just go in a blink, what would those be?
Wow, that's a really tough question. Um, I could tell you the three that are on my mind right now, which could be considered also like maybe the top five or top 10 maybe.
Hmm.
So I think the first place I've been thinking a lot about, like I mentioned earlier, was Iran. I spent a month, my partner and I spent a month traveling there a few years ago. And I think that is so like everything you see about Iran in the media. And then when you actually go there, it's like two completely different worlds. And of course, the country is not its politics. Let's make that clear. And I think Iran was just full of surprises in every which way. Like we talk about, Paris and New York and Berlin, where I'm right now, or London being like great cities, but the cities of Iran, Isfahan, Shiraz, I don't think I've ever seen greater cities than that. Like the
Hmm.
kind of architecture, the way that it's been preserved, um, like the gardens, the way it's integrated with nature, and so on. I think those are absolutely some of the greatest cities in the world. And of course, a lot has happened in Iran. I think there are so many restrictions on women, for example. And one of the reasons I was really hesitant to go to Iran was because even as a woman traveler, you have to wear a hijab the whole time. And I think when I kind of made my peace with that, thinking that okay, it's 1 month and I can do it. I went in with this almost with this sort of like judgment that people are living here and like the women have just accepted that they have to wear the hijab and they've accepted all these restrictions on them. But as I spent time there, I realized that actually there's so much resilience and so much rebellion and courage in the people, in the way that they are living their lives despite, like the constant threat of being arrested, being jailed, and so on. And I mean, not just women, but also like artists, people doing conservation work, things like that. Um, the fact that they are still, following their dreams and their purpose in life and doing this despite everything else, it really inspired me. I think on
Hmm.
a regular basis, the kind of conversations I had with people was so poetic, including poetry itself. So, like,
Right.
anyone from like a cab driver to a new friend to a restaurant manager, they are like reciting verses of like Hafiz and Sadi and so on. It's a whole other world, the conversations there. And of course, because of the economic situation in Iran and because of the sanctions and everything, you don't see anything Western in that part of the world. So you never see like a McDonald's or a Starbucks or a Zara or an H&M or any kind of like brand from outside. So it's very much all like homegrown, which is also
Hmm.
incredible in a way, right? And just then the kind of friendliness and the warmth and the hospitality, the people that we stayed with again and again and again. I think pretty much everyone that we spent time with and then had to leave to move on to the next place because we were also doing this land journey through Iran into Armenia. And everyone we spent time with, I think by the end of it, I was just teary eyed to leave them and like say goodbye to them. Just that level of depth in connections. And it's so rare in today's world where, everything is a little bit more commercial, a little bit more distracted. And to feel that kind of human connection was so very rare. So, yeah, long answer to your question. Iran is definitely one of those places. I think the second would probably be Chile. Again,
Mm.
one of the most incredibly beautiful countries in the world, environmentally very fragile and diverse. Also
Yeah.
home to some incredible people. Also, as someone who loves Spanish as a language and can get by holding conversations, it was really, really fulfilling to spend time there. And then I think the third, I would have to say India, because, having traveled in many parts of the world, I think there's nowhere like India. Um, there is no country like India. And I mean, I don't think it's my bias. I think it's a
Mm.
reality that, in India, just every few hundred kilometers, how everything changes, like the landscape changes, the people, the culture, the food, the traditions, and the kind of, warmth and hospitality you experience in India, especially in remote parts of the country where people might have very little but are very willing to still share it. I
Yeah.
think that doesn't happen in many places, and so yeah, India is definitely like my home country, but also my soul country.
Oh, so true. So true. You touched on food, which is actually a very important part of life and travel. And one of the ways to kind of know a country or know its people is through food. Food is also one of the comfort factors that define whether you're enjoying your stay or not, right? So, what is your relationship with food, and how much food defines whether you enjoy a stay or not? And do you really go out and try everything, or are you more of a I have a set of things that I really want to have with me, otherwise it won't be a great travel? Like, how much food defines travel for you?
I have to say, first of all, like travel has had a huge influence on my food choices. So I've
Mm.
been vegan for almost, I think, like more than 10 years now. And it was because of traveling that the even the idea of veganism and our suffering footprint kind of came into my life. I was in Central America at the time, and I was traveling in Nicaragua. So I was on this bus, and it so happened that it was the holiday season. So it was the period between Christmas and New Year, and a lot of people were heading home on the countryside. So buses in Nicaragua are known as chicken buses because people are packed in like chickens.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the nickname, and it's very ironic that that's the nickname because like I was on this journey like somewhere very deep in the countryside, and it was completely pan bus, and I was lucky to get a spot to sit. And then this woman boarded the bus, and she was carrying like this sack and a bunch of other things, and she put the sack near my feet, and something in the sack started moving. So I realized that there's probably like an animal in there, and it just felt very uncomfortable. So I asked her if she can move the sack, and I didn't realize, but she moved it towards my back, and then something started poking me from inside, and then I realized there's actually like tiny chicks inside the sack, and they were just kind of gasping for air in this bus that I was also gasping for air in, but they were inside a sack. And so anyway, that journey happened, and eventually she got off at her stop. I got off at mine. And I think the next time I was in a kitchen and I was making an egg, I kind of just looked at it and started wondering, what is this that I'm cooking? And that image of those chicks kind of came back to me. And then I started reading about, like the egg industry and how male chicks are basically grinded alive because there's nothing for them in the industry. That led me to reading about dairy, for example, and how what happens to cows in the dairy industry. And then also like reading about leather and wool and silk. And I think it's almost like this dark hole that I went down. I grew up in a meat eating family, but like when I was a teenager, I had decided to turn vegetarian. I guess I kind of made that connection between an animal and the food on my plate. But reading about dairy and eggs and honey and leather and wool and silk and so on, it was a whole other revelation. And I didn't really know what to do with this newly acquired information. And so I think for a while I just kept making excuses that, I like the word vegan had entered my mind somewhere. But as a traveler who doesn't really have a home, who doesn't have a
Yes.
kitchen and is constantly reliant on other people to feed me, like either in their kitchens or in their restaurants and so on, like how can I ever be vegan? And how can I ever give up traveling either?
Mm.
And so I think to convince myself, also because it left a deep impact on me, to convince myself, I started living on like organic farms around the world, visited like some very conventional like dairy operations in the Swiss Alps, for example, where, we had this image of cows having a really great life. Also in parts of India where there are these farms which are awarded as best dairy farms and so on. The free range label of hens and so on. And I think the more I lived there, the more I realized that it's not that like people have relationships with their animals, but only because they bring economic benefits. And of course, there is, there are people who are entirely dependent on the animals for their source of protein or for their source of livelihoods. And, that's different. But like for someone like me who's anyway spending money to buy all of this, I can transition out of this. And like, I don't need to, consume dairy, for example. I don't need to consume eggs. I don't need to consume honey for sure. And then dairy in its other forms like butter and cheese and ghee and paneer and so on. I can do without it. Like I don't need it. And I don't need to spend my money on something that I know is bringing suffering to another sentient being. Back in 2015, I decided to turn vegan and kind of try to cut out animal products from my life as much as possible. And of course, at that point, the question was, can I still travel and be vegan?
Mm.
Like you said, food is so important, like when you're traveling, because it tells you about like a culture, it tells you about traditions, but it's also a way to bond with people. And
Yeah.
so I think that was really a question in my mind, like, can I still be vegan and do that? And I'm very happy to share that actually being vegan has led me to some incredible people and experiences and food traditions around the world. I've made some beautiful friendships just because of the shared love of good food and compassionate food, and met so many people around the world who are actually, bringing back traditional recipes which were largely plant based, or which can be customized to be vegan now. In a way, you can experience like the culture and the cuisine while also being kinder, I guess, to animals and to the planet. So it has been a whole journey with food and traveling.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And so many people are turning vegan and vegetarian across the globe. It was not the case 20 years ago, or maybe more. The first time I traveled out of India, it was to Netherlands, and I was there a month and a half. And only I know how I survived because I don't eat meat. There were not many choices. Like I'm just was eating cheese all the time, fruits, and some soups. That was that. Recent years have been so easy. Like you get what you want, and it's not that difficult. We might not have like 50 items to choose from, but if you get five good things on a menu, why not? So definitely the world has opened up and provide more option than it had like 20, 25 years ago. So Shivya, do you get homesick? Do you ever get homesick?
Um, I think for me, like home is no longer a place. I think it's
Mm.
more a feeling. And I do get homesick when, things are not going the way I've planned, or, um, I just find myself in an uncomfortable situation, or I don't know, maybe I'm just bored of where I am. Home for me is like, it's the feeling of being on a long train journey and looking out of the window, maybe going somewhere that I've never been before, and just that feeling of anticipation and a little bit of anxiety and a lot of excitement. It's also the feeling of, meeting a complete stranger in a place that's new to me, when we don't have a language in common, when our cultures are very different, and yet feeling like we've probably known each other for a long time. And
Mm.
it's also the feeling of going back somewhere after many, many years and meeting someone that I just met in passing, like a fleeting friendship, and just being able to pick up where we left off. Um, and I think home sometimes is also the feeling um, of food that I love from around the world. So this year I've chosen to be based in Berlin, and a lot of people ask why. And I think food is kind of at the core of it because I can't keep going back to, let's say, Ethiopia and Uzbekistan and uh, parts of, like the Arab world and so on. But I can find all of that food here. And also
Mm.
people from there here. But I think it's the feeling of having that food that, brings back so many memories and experiences.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's more of a feeling than a place. And I feel homesick for the feeling.
Mm. Right. How do you find comfort when things are all over the place outside? Because mostly people will say, I'll go home to the comfort of knowing and, the sense of belonging. That's not the case with you. You are differently wired or chosen a different life. So, what is it that you reach out for?
I think I also reach out for that sense of belonging. And for me, that sense of belonging is being in nature in some form. So, of course, if I'm in the mountains, by a river, in a forest, it's very obvious. Like those are the forms I choose. But even when I'm in a city, I think for example, being in a park, walking on a tree-lined street, observing like wildflowers or like like the little things of nature. Um,
Mm.
Also, just something as simple as being on a bicycle and just feeling the world go by slowly and breathing in the air and feeling the change of landscape. I think these it's the little things that give me the sense of belonging, and this is what I seek when the world feels heavy, which it does right now, and also
Mm.
when like things are not going as I'd like them to.
Mm. My own experience suggests that the more we travel, of course, we broaden our understanding of the world, become more acceptable of the way people are, build nuanced layers of empathy, and kind of chip away the prejudices or preconceived notions about a place or people. In a nutshell, it makes you a better person. What's been your experience? The more different kind of cultures and people you see, the more you find commonalities. We are not as different as the media portray or the politicians are saying. So, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think like traveling and being somewhere and connecting with people in their homes, in their landscapes, I think it's really a reminder of our shared humanity. And I
Mm.
think that is so powerful. It chips away all the layers. Like your language might be different, your culture, your food, your traditions, your religion, your political beliefs, all of it. But eventually, we have a level of shared humanity. Everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to have a sense of safety and protection, and everyone wants to be received with compassion. That is so common, like universal across everywhere from like South America to Asia to other parts of the world. I think like travel can be really powerful in kind of making us realize, if we are open to it, that we are actually just the same, and these outward differences are actually like certain layers or like superficial layers, but when we chip deeper and look into our hearts, I think we are all the same. And that is why, like I mentioned, it feels like a very heavy time with everything that's happening in Iran, and because it's a place and people that feel, like really close to my heart. And I
Mm.
think for like a lot of times when I have conversations about this, for many people, Iran, or other places like Palestine or Sudan, they just seem like really far away places where these things happen. When you've actually been there and you've built a relationship with people there, it hits you in a completely different way, right? Because you feel like I am also them, they're also me,
Mm.
and parts of me are still there. And so I think that kind of shared humanity can be really, really strong, especially in today's world when there's so much cultural division. There's so much like, us versus them, me versus the other. What we really absolutely need right now is to, break away from that and actually look at how we are all, humans, or even go bigger than that, how we are all sentient beings, and, we all
Yeah.
feel pain and desire love in the same way.
Yeah. So we have more in common than we accept many a times. True. There's another aspect to travel, which is uh, often introspection. Like you reflect a lot. If you're in front of a beautiful waterfall or on a lovely lake, it pulls you to slow down and be in the moment and be more retrospective. Have you also grown more inward and started making those inner inquiries about who am I, why the world is, and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a very long time to find, kind of even identify like what that inner path for me would be like. And
Mm.
I was just reflecting actually this morning that it was like when I took that break from work and went to Spiti. So I was a volunteer traveler there. And one of my assignments was to go to these remote monasteries and nunneries across the valley, because they were building like a monk for a month or a nun for a month program. So someone could
Mm.
travel to Spiti and commit to being a monk or a nun for a month. So they would be kind of initiated into the like the Buddhist philosophy and like the examination of the mind and so on. And so I was meeting all these monks and nuns, and I met these nuns who had lived in isolation in a cave for the last 5 years, 10 years. And at that
Mm.
point, like I don't know, maybe I didn't have like the wisdom or the ability or the curiosity to ask what it is that they're really examining. And I think all these years later, I did a retreat last year at the Deer Park Institute in Beed, which is
Yeah.
it's a Buddhist monastery turned learning center. So now they hold like short courses, and the course that I did was called Chasing Rainbows. So it was this retreat that kind of asked, what are we chasing in life, and where is that chase taking us? And I think that made me realize that one thing I do is like really hold on strongly to like my identities, as a traveler or as a storyteller, and other identities as well, as an introvert, as certain things that I can do and certain things I can't do, and so on.
Yeah.
And also like to examine like my emotions and stuff like that. And so I've been doing like a longer Buddhist psychology program the past 6 months. And I think I'm finally starting to understand what is it that monks and nuns have been studying for like centuries, which is really the working of the mind, and why the mind works in a certain way, and what implication does that have for our lives, but also for like the broader world, and how can we inculcate like more compassion within us, and show up in a world in a more purposeful and meaningful way. So yeah, I think there has been in the last like year or so, there has been a lot of that inner reflection. Also, I think it's the first time in my life that I've understood why I should meditate, because I've always known that meditation can be helpful and so on, and I've tried it off and on, never stuck to it. But
Mm.
it's only in the last year or so that I've understood what is like the goal of meditation, like why even meditate. So yeah, I think it's been a whole other journey.
Mm. Welcome. You'll have a good time. And yeah, shaking up a lot of beliefs. So yes, just get ready for that. Um,
Yeah, very happening.
yeah. Yeah, especially identities, right? You mentioned about strong identities. When you start looking, uh, most of the belief systems and identities are the most difficult to kind of let go of as you kind of go further down the path. So yeah, all the best. Now, Shivya, as we're kind of coming to close, of course, we are culmination of all our experiences and curiosities, and that defines what you do next. Of course, now you are in Berlin. I'm sure you have some ideas, and you also have a book that's kind of coming up. So, in a nutshell, what's next? What's gonna be the next big adventure you're on?
Yeah, so I've been on the adventure for the last 3 or so years, which is working towards my next book. I think maybe by the time this podcast is released, it should be available for pre-order or order. It's called Rootless and Restless, and it basically defines, I think, a lot about me and my life and my journey. And
Mhm.
it's really a book about, my adventures, slow traveling in places like Iran that I mentioned, Uzbekistan, Chile, Patagonia, Myanmar, places that wouldn't, traditionally be on a traveler's radar. And what it's been like to spend time in these places with, communities that have maybe lived off the grid or in very different ways. And I think also this search for human connections, environmental connections, and really seeing like my place in the world, and examining, existential questions through that. But also
Yeah.
looking at how traveling can be, especially in this day and age when there's so much social validation kind of traveling. Like what is it to kind of shed that layer of social validation and travel in a way that can really transform us, our worldviews, and also the way we show up in the world. So that's really been a focus of the book that I've been working on. And yeah, I think the other thing of this has been the inner journey that we just spoke about, which has really taken up a lot of my, like introspection and time and energy. And also, I think since COVID, I think it has been this realization that, maybe before that I was spending like 3 to 4 months in a place or 6 months in a place and then moving on. And now I feel like I'm much more geared towards slower travel. So maybe spending a year or 2 years in a place. So my partner and I lived in Goa most of COVID, and then we moved to Himachal for a couple of years, and now we're in Berlin. So I think like this kind of slower travel also gives you like so much more time and space to connect with places and people and really find yourself in that place and in that moment in time. So
Yeah.
really excited to see how this time turns out to be, and no idea what comes next after this.
Oh, all the very best. How can we end it without talking about books? You just mentioned about your book, but what have been some of the books that have had deep impression on you? Any recent reads or forever favorites you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think there have been many books. One of my goals in the last few years has been to read books by local authors in the places that I'm traveling to, because one realization has been that the books that are most commonly available to us are usually written by Western authors, and a lot of it is you spend a short amount of time in a place and then you write a book about it. But I think when you read a book by someone who's actually grown up in that community, in that culture, it might not count as a travel book, but it actually tells you
Yeah.
so much more about a place and its people, especially like nonfiction. So that's really like been my sweet spot of like the kind of books I've wanted to read. We've talked a lot about Iran today. And I think one of my favorite books is by Azan Nafisi. She's an Iranian professor and author, and the book is Reading Lolita in Tehran. And the
Mm,
title of the book is so fascinating, right? Like it's
yeah.
she talks about one, the transition from a much freer life for women to what happened when the revolution happened, and then there was like an Islamic regime. So um, just the restrictions that were imposed on women like her who had been free both in outward appearance but also in thought before, and so what that transition was like. And the book revolves around her as a professor starting a book club with some of her best students, female students, and reading books that are now banned in Tehran. So Lolita is one of those books, and then kind of like it's this parallel between literature and lived reality. So it's absolutely beautiful and highly recommended. Another book that I really enjoyed reading was when I was traveling in Cuba. And I think pretty much everyone knows che Guevara,
Yeah.
the Argentinian revolutionary, and his book Motorcycle Diaries, which is a really
Yeah.
popular travel memoir. But this is a book that's written by his wife, who's Cuban, Aleda March, and she kind of writes about her journey meeting Che. Um, and about her country at a time when it was at a very critical juncture in terms of a socialist revolution. And
Mm.
also I think just her love for nature and the way she connected with her country and her people. So I think it was a whole other perspective of both Che, but also of the country, and to see it from her lens was really powerful.
Wow.
So
What's the name of the book? I didn't catch it.
it's called Remembering Che.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. I totally enjoy conversations with my guests, but this is my favorite part when I get to hear about some new book that I have never heard of or not on my to-be list. So thank you so much for one such recommendation. Shivya, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure people who are listening to it or watching us will have takeaways about how to be more mindful and conscious when they travel and leave lighter footprint as we go through life. All the best with the new book and your adventures. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much for having me, Pracheta. I love this conversation.